Watching Hurricane Irma and tracking it as it moves closer to Florida. We have, of course, watches and warnings in effect as we roll into the evening. The storm is actually gained a little bit of strength this afternoon. The winds are 155 miles an hour at this point, and it is moving just north of Cuba. You can see the eye of the storm right there. And the latest coordinates moving west at 14. And that track is expected to continue until it makes it to the north coast of Cuba with a turn after that. The computer models are coming in this afternoon, and actually the latest European model is starting to come in, and it's suggesting even a little bit farther track toward the west, more into Collier County, which works in our favor. Optimistic in a sense. We want to see that track shift west, and it gets the strongest winds out of our area. But at the same time, be very cautious about these shifts, because as we've been showing you for the last week and a half, the computer models will shift one way and then they come back to the east and then they go back again. And at this point, these shifts are going to be very subtle. They're going to be 20, 30, maybe 40 miles each side. Call that the windshield wiper effect. And the computer models are the very, very finely gridded models, and we're going to see these small fluctuations the next couple of days. But this is still a very powerful hurricane. And either way, if the shift is to the west, we're dealing with hurricane force winds here either way, simply because it's such a large storm. All right, the 2 p.m. intermediate advisory is out, so we're along the north coast of Cuba. Went through the Turks and Caicos last night. We all watched that as that eye, the eye wall just sat over the Turks and Caicos through the evening hours. Saturday, we have a storm that just kind of cuts along the north coast of Cuba and then brings it up. You can see just to the west of Key Largo, kind of the middle Keys at this point as a Category 4, 145. Now, as we've been talking for the last, couple of weeks on this thing, keep in mind that intensity forecasts are problematic. So I always tell people when we give hurricane talks, the most likely scenario here is a Category 4, but there is a chance that we could see a 3 or a 5. The intensity forecast, no one forecasted that it was going to be 185 miles an hour for almost 2 days earlier in the week. So, that the scenario is for a 4 making landfall and then weakening as it moves up across the western side of Lake Okeechobee and then tracking up into North Florida, and then eventually we'd have a rainmaker, a tropical depression or a remnant low cutting across Atlanta after that. So here we go with our watches and warnings. We have a hurricane watch for the Treasure Coast. We have a hurricane warning in red. That's for Palm Beach County. And likely that watch on the Treasure Coast will be bumped up to a warning shortly because we're just seeing this storm come closer. And remember, warning criteria is that hurricane conditions are likely within the next 36 hours, and a watch is 48 hours out. What are we looking at as far as the impacts here for really the 4 key elements of a hurricane? The wind, Category 4, possibly a 5 at this point, looking at a 4. Think about this. The storm right now is 155 miles an hour. 2 miles an hour stronger, and it is a Category 5. And I think we've almost, in a sense, become numb to the fact that it was 185 for a couple of days, and 145, 155 doesn't sound too bad. Those are extremely dangerous hurricanes, even at that speed. So that's important to realize, and even though we're seeing these shifts to the west, we're still looking at significant wind and storm surge and rainfall here. The tornado threat, it will be around. You need 2 things for tornado development. You need warm air rising in the atmosphere, and you need wind shear. We have both of those with a landfalling hurricane. So there will be a tornado risk, and flooding rains, obviously. At this point, it appears to be about 5 to 10 inches of rain, but some areas could get locally higher amounts than that. Storm surge will also be an issue along the coastline. Now, the farther west the track shifts, the better the storm surge scenario pans out for us, because you need a couple of things for storm surge. You need strong winds moving over that water, and you also need what we call fetch, which is a long stretch of winds moving in toward the coastline. And those 2 elements, we're losing one as the storm moves to the west, because now a lot of the winds are over Florida and not over the ocean and the Gulf Stream and the Bahamas. So these numbers will change too as we go through the next couple of days. But there will be a storm surge either way because it's such a large system. But as it shifts a little west, we're looking at those numbers dropping a little bit. I caution you though, There's a sense of optimism out there, and I can feel it, but the tracks could easily shift back to the east. That is possible the next 24 hours, so keep that in mind. All right, here's a breakdown of our timeline as we roll through the next 3 to 4 days. Gusty winds today, obviously, not bad out there. A fantastic day to get your last-minute preparations in place. Tomorrow morning shouldn't be too bad, but we start to get into some very gusty winds and some of the outer rain squalls, the feeder bands of this hurricane as it moves closer. So by the afternoon and evening, we're dealing with some pretty nasty weather. You don't really want to be outside. Saturday night and into Sunday, we're looking at tropical storm force winds, so those are 39 miles an hour stronger, developing into hurricane conditions on Sunday. Those torrential rains picking up as they sweep all of those feeder bands in off the Gulf Stream and across South Florida. Peak day is Sunday, and on the current timing, it looks like Sunday afternoon through about the early evening hours. It places the center of the storm very near the lake in the late afternoon, early evening. So that's when we would expect to be near the core of the hurricane. At this point, that eye is forecast to be just west of the lake, but those strong winds stretch out. Well, the hurricane force winds, 50, 60 miles, and the tropical storm force winds will cover the entire south and central Florida area on Sunday afternoon and evening. And then we're looking at peak storm surge as we get into Sunday. So Sunday is our big day into Sunday evening, and then things start to improve pretty quickly as we get into early Monday as the storm picks up speed and races up toward North Florida. So that's kind of the breakdown, Jay and Shannon, of what we're looking at for the next few. It's beautiful out there today. That's what we see when a hurricane approaches. We have high pressure around the hurricane. That brings us sunshine, but don't be fooled. It's still coming, and it's still a big weather event for South Florida.